We are going to start the session today. The opening of today's session will be in charge of Riccardo Viaggi, who is the Secretary General of the European Builders Confederation. Some time ago, we talked with him, and he mentioned that under this organization, there are 2 million construction companies in Europe, and he will be talking about advocacy for how SMEs in the construction sector must assume BIM. This is one of the greatest concerns in Europe. Large companies normally have solved this, but SMEs are still to do that. So we'll see how Europe is thinking of embracing the change. Riccardo, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. I will be speaking English. Voy a hablar en inglés. So, it is always difficult to start the second day of a conference. I hope I will try, I hope I will manage to bring you some motivation to start the second day of this conference. As Ignacy said, I represent a European association based in Brussels, and I will try to give you some ideas, some food for thought on how to make BIM an SME-friendly tool. SME-friendly meaning accessible, of course, to SMEs. But before doing that, a little bit of figures. What construction is in Europe. What construction is in Europe is similar to what construction is in all the countries of Europe. Certainly the big economies, the big 5 economies of the EU, 6 if we include Poland, which is of course a large country. Construction sector in Europe is about 3 million companies, 3 million companies which employ roughly 13 million people. So the average is quickly made. An average company in Europe has 4 employees. Construction companies are small. Construction companies are micro. They are, by definition, micro enterprises. 92% of them, and since I have this tool, I will use it. 92% of them have less than 10 people. Who have less than 10 employees. 99.9% of all the companies in construction in Europe are by definition SMEs, so they have less than 250 people. Of course, there is a large difference between a company of 25 and a company of 250. You can understand it. It is also important to say that 99% of the companies have less than 50 people. They are average companies. They are medium-sized companies. These companies are not only many, they are big, they are important. They develop 80% of the output of the construction sector. The construction sector has an output of 10% of the EU GDP. And with these numbers, it is by far the largest industrial sector in Europe, much larger than metal industry, the chemical industry. It is the largest employer in private businesses with 13 million people, and 83% of these 13 million people work in SMEs. So SMEs are not only many; they're very small, but together they employ 83% of the sector employees, of the sector's workers. It is important also to notice that those companies have a local dimension. They have a local dimension. They also have a very high responsibilities because the products, if you allow me, that they produce, the buildings, they use 41% of the EU energy and they create 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions of Europe. So the responsibilities are important. The sector is huge. The sector is also important for economic reasons, as we have seen, and this is why we like to use sometimes some quotes. Well, I imagine you all heard about the quote, "What is good for Ford is good for America." This was another period. but a French member of parliament once said, when construction grows, everything grows. I'm sure I don't need to tell a Spanish audience about this. But what we like to say is that what is good for SMEs is good for construction. As the first two are paradoxical remarks, the third is also a bit of a paradoxical remark. But I think I just show you that if you do something SME friendly, you're doing something good for construction. And why am I saying this? Well, because roughly 25 years ago, people from 6 European countries, including Spain, decided to establish EBC in Brussels, a European Builders Confederation, an organization which has now 16 members and represents roughly 2 million companies of the construction sector. All the different trades of construction are represented, not just the builders themselves. This is why we like to call ourselves Construction SMEs Europe as well. And of course, we have a seat in Brussels. We're also a founding member of SBS, a new organization for standardization. And it is important because SBS represents SMEs' interest in the standardization field. And this is interesting because we have just been accepted as an expert in CENTESI 442 on BIM, on Building Information Modeling. This is mainly where we developed our knowledge on BIM, our policy knowledge on BIM, and this is also why we would like to work practically on BIM, and this very nice fits into today's conference, and most of all the session right after with the BIM case studies. So this European organization has a much larger representation levels than ours, than just EBC. We are a founding partner of this organization, and this is why I wanted to give you an idea also of this. Why standardizing BIM? The CENTESI 442 on building information modeling was created very recently. And of course, I don't need to tell you that the BIM story started earlier than April 2015. But this is when people in Brussels realized that they needed to do something from a policy point of view, from a coordination point of view. And this is of course when things get a bit more difficult to get the agreement around the table of 28 people. I don't know if you are following it, but they're trying in Brussels as we speak to make an agreement on the UK. This is not as difficult, but it is also a challenge. Why we need to standardize is to try and develop a structured set of standards, specifications, and reports on BIM. So this is why we decided to delegate an expert to this technical committee. The expert is not me, if you're wondering. We want to have this as a platform for the standardization, because the European Commission is behind, of course, this work, this mandated work at the CEN level, and the European Union has started to set up a task force. Adam Matthews was here yesterday talking about this. Of course, we are involved in that work. Again, why? Because we know, we are aware, and we are becoming more and more aware that BIM is a groundbreaking element for construction, to build better, to build faster, to build spending less. We want to lead the uptake on BIM from a large point of view, and we want this to be implemented also by small construction companies. So the BIM in practice, the BIM in the reality, is about a BIM where the needs of SMEs are taken into account when you think about BIM. Recently, we have started to develop a sort of list where we see the BIM related needs for the SMEs. And I will start from a very specific remark. If we want BIM to get off the ground, it needs to be adapted also for the SMEs. And this very special market segment of SMEs is, of course, renovation. It is, of course, also about new buildings, but the size of the companies and the way the market is oriented is more and more about renovation. Renovation in general, but of course, renovation, when we think about that, we all have in our heads the idea of the energy efficiency renovation. And this is a huge market. Eurostat is foreseeing that in a couple of years, the market will be 50% renovation and 50% new buildings, if you include, of course, all civil engineering and public works. So we need to build a BIM, which is the tool in which SMEs can rely on when they do renovation operations, most of all in the energy efficiency, because the I in BIM being information, the buildings of the future, even houses, will rely a lot on information and on the way you manage certain information. One of the most interesting information is, of course, the information on the energy use of a building, and we think this is also very important in the renovation market. We need to ensure that the use of digital model will not be grounds for exclusion of SMEs. And unfortunately, I would like to say this a priori, ex ante, when we start certain works, because we have experience of certain groundbreaking technologies or specifications or products which have created the grounds for exclusion of the SME market. This is why we think that this is a very important, and it's not the second point by chance. We also need to guarantee that the development of the digital model tools will reflect the SME needs. So in practice, the first two main remarks needs to be translated into the development of the digital model tools. And we need to ensure that they will not become prescriptive for particular products, for specific products. We need, of course, these 3 million companies need to be able to choose their own products on certain specifications. We know that standardization in the past has been used as a tool to restrict these possibilities of choice by certain producers. Commercial wars have been taking place in certain rooms in Brussels. We don't need to repeat that mistake. That for us is fundamental. We also need to make sure that these tools are economically accessible. They must not be too costly. They must be reasonable in their pricing and in their possibility to be applied by SMEs. They need to be well developed. Bearing in mind construction SMEs, there is a nice word which can really be translated into practice, which is think small first. If you try to think and act thinking small first, you will make sure that the tools are well developed for construction SMEs. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, there are only very few, it's 0.1% of the companies I showed you that have more than 250 people. The Bouygues, the Vinci, the Dragados of this world are very few. They're very, very few, and we don't need to think, we cannot think big first, and then maybe make exceptions, and then maybe make derogations. We need to think small first. This is our main political remark that we make everywhere. This translates into developing well-designed tool for construction SMEs. We need to develop them to be easily implemented, not only accessible from an economic point of view, but they need to be easily implemented. This is just a specification of point number 6, I would say. And we also need to integrate the question of insurance providers. Of course, when things go wrong, and that only is important when things go wrong, but sometimes things go wrong, unfortunately, when the insurance providers come into the picture, what is their understanding? And unfortunately, we know that this is an important question, not only in the development of BIM. When renewables came into the market, some insurers, some insurance providers, some insurance companies were now willing to insure small construction companies for the installation of PV panels. This is exactly what was going on some decades ago. This is the risk that this happens also in BIM. Some perspectives from our point of view. Well, we need to contribute to the activities of this CEN/TC 442 on BIM. Barely just born, it held its first plenary meeting a week ago in Oslo. So it's just the beginning of the activities. We need to consolidate our position on BIM, an SME position on BIM, and we do this with our members. Our members are National SME Association from the 16 countries which I showed you before, and together with other organizations to bring a real SME position, a real SME stance on BIM. We need, of course, to raise awareness. The fact that the Secretary General of EBC knows about BIM doesn't mean that the members of EBC all know about BIM. This is unfortunate. This is, I don't know if I can call it asymmetries of information, but this is exactly what is going on. We need to raise awareness about BIM. We want to do that as EBC and also the members of Small Business Standards, but all the national organizations need to raise the awareness of these tools towards their companies and their local associations. What also, for example, in Spain, Fundación Laboral is doing, and they were yesterday making the case, is of course very important as a training point of view. We need to keep the SME stakeholders informed about BIM developments. So this is actually one of the reasons why we are in this work at the technical committee. This is also one of the reasons why I recently started to attend these events. I was a couple of months ago in Amsterdam, and it is a very important way to be informed about those involvement and for us to transfer the information. But of course, it goes without saying, we need to start training the companies. We need to start training, and again, the example of a bilateral organization like Fundación Laboral in Spain. Others exist in other countries. They have their own resources. They have their own mission of training businesses, and they need to start doing that on a massive scale. This is, of course, can only be done in a full cooperation with the other representatives and the other actors in the BIM chain. With that, I concluded my opening remarks. I really wish you, and I will, I hope myself, I will learn something. I'm sure I will learn something during the day today. And I wish you all good success on this second day of the BIM Summit. Thank you very much for your attention.